Good morning, grade 5. Let's complete the lessons that we started before. We talked before about the friction. And let's remember, we said the friction is a force between two bodies when they touch each other and they act in the opposite direction of movement. What is the importance of the friction, or what the friction do? It decreases the speed. And we said we have three factors that affect this friction: the surface area, surface material, and speed. We said before, all of them began with S. Again, surface area, large or small, surface material, rough or smooth, and speed, if it's fast or slow. In today's lesson, we have to know the different types of friction force. The friction force has three types, which are: first, a friction between solid objects, two solid bodies that touch each other, like the friction between our hands. They are two solid bodies that touch each other. Or like if I made a friction between the book and the desk, both of them are solid objects. Then, the second type is the friction force between a solid body and the air. Something solid that moves in the air, like the bird. The bird is solid and it's moving or flying through the air. And we call this type of friction air resistance. So, when we have a friction force between a solid body and the air, we called it air resistance. The third type of the friction force is a type between a solid object or a solid body and the water. So it's a solid something or solid object that move or touch the water. Like what? Like a fish that swim in the water, or like the boat. So when I'm having a friction between a solid body and the water, we call this water resistance. Again, we have three types of the friction force: a friction between two solids, friction between solid and air, and we call it air resistance, a friction between solid and water, and we call it water resistance. Okay. For the first one, between the solid object, is what we talked before about it. Is a regular type, and we said it's affected by the surface area, surface material, and the speed. In today's lesson, we're going to talk in details about the air resistance and the water resistance. First, the friction between a solid object and air. As I told you as example, the bird flying in air. So it's a solid something that move or touch the air. And what we call this type of friction? We will call it air resistance. Okay. The air resistance, it's a type of friction force between what? Between a moving object and the air. And the air resistance as a type of friction force, so it must act in the opposite direction of movement. So the air resistance acts in the opposite direction of movement. You can notice the air resistance if you are moving in the car that move fast and you get your hands outside the window. You will find that the air push your hand in the opposite direction of the movement of the car. So this is what we call air resistance. Okay? So we have an air resistance where the air tries to push the car in the opposite direction. Why do this? To slow down or to decrease the speed. Okay, the factors affecting the air resistance. As we said before, if you remember, that the friction force is affected by three factors: the surface area, surface material, type of surface material, and the speed. Okay, but for the air resistance, we don't have a smooth or rough surface, because the surface that will move in it is the what? Is the air. So I didn't need a type of surface material because the surface that will move in it, it's one, which is the air. So it will not affect on the air resistance. So the air resistance will be affected by the other two factors, which are what? Which are the speed of the moving body and the surface area of the moving body. Again, the factors that affect the air resistance are only two, which are the speed and the surface area. Okay, first let's start with the speed. Like I told you before, if you are moving in the car and you put your hand outside, if the car moves slowly, you will feel that the air resistance is low. But if the car moves fast, so the air will push your hands more, so the air resistance will be more. So as the speed increase, the air resistance will increase. Again, as the speed increase, the air resistance increases. Okay, like if you ride a bicycle with a high speed, so your bicycle will make more friction with the air. If you run fast in the air, so you will make more friction or you will touch the air more. So by increasing the speed, the air resistance increases, and by decreasing the speed, the air resistance decreases. So this means that what? This means that between the speed and the air resistance, there is a what? A direct relationship. And again, we said what's mean by direct relationship? It's mean they are the same. If the speed increase, the friction increase. If the speed decrease, the air resistance decrease. So there is a direct relationship between the air resistance and the speed of the body. The second factor that will affect the air resistance is the surface area. Surface area mean, and we said before, if it's small or large. Okay, if I'm having a small car and a trunk, and both of them will move through the air, they touch the air while they are moving. Which one will touch more the air, or which one will make more resistance? For sure the trunk. It will touch or make more friction or more air resistance with the air. So as the surface area increase, the air resistance will increase. And as the surface area decrease, the air resistance will decrease. So again, there is a direct relationship between what? Between the surface area and the air resistance. Okay, that's why the trains, the rockets, and the new cars and the aircrafts are designed with a streamline shape. What's mean by streamline shape? It means that in the beginning of them, it's smaller than the other parts. As you see, the beginning part is smaller. That's what we call a streamline shape. Now, if they have a streamline shape in the beginning, so this means that what I made to the surface area, yes, I decrease the surface area. And if I decrease the surface area, so the air resistance decrease. And if the air resistance decrease, so the speed will increase. Okay, so the air resistance or the friction, as we said before, it decreases the speed. So if I'm having low or I'm having decreasing in the air resistance or in the friction, so the speed will increase. So why the trains, why the rockets, why the new cars, and why the aircrafts have a streamlined shape? To decrease the surface area, so the air resistance decrease and the speed increase. Okay, and even the birds have a streamlined shape. Why the birds have a streamlined shape? It's also decrease surface area, decrease air resistance, increase speed. Decrease surface area, decrease air resistance, and increase the speed. And the opposite. I'm having a parachutist, it will open the parachute to land safely. It must open his parachute. When he opens his parachute, so he will make an increasing or a decreasing for the surface area. it will increase the space, so it make an increasing for the surface area. When the surface area increase, so the air resistance increase and the speed decrease. Again, the air resistance increase, the surface area increase, so the speed will decrease. So it will land safely. It will not hit the ground. Okay, the same for the birds. When they are landing, they must stretch their wings. If they stretch their wings, so what they do for the surface area? Yes, they increase the surface area. So we increase the surface area, so the air resistance increase and the speed will decrease. So take care. Surface area is with air resistance. If this increase, this will increase. And if the air resistance increase, so the speed will decrease. Okay, the second type of the friction is between a solid object and the water. And I told you before, like a ship moving in the sea or a boat moving in the sea. And what we call this type of friction? We will call it water resistance. The water resistance, it's a friction between a moving object and the water. And again, the water resistance, it's a type of friction force, so it acts in the opposite direction of movement. And what are the factors that affect the water resistance? It is the same as air resistance, the speed and the surface area. The speed, by increasing the speed, I start with the speed. So by increasing the speed, the water resistance increase. By decreasing the speed, the water resistance decrease. So there is a direct relationship between the speed and the water resistance. So again, I start with the speed. As I started with the speed, so they are directly proportional. By increasing the speed, the water resistance increase. By decreasing the speed, the water resistance decrease. Then the surface area. It is the same as air resistance and the same as a friction because they are all types of friction. By increasing the surface area, the water resistance increase, and by decreasing the surface area, the water resistance decreases. And there is a direct relationship between the friction force or the water resistance and the surface area. Okay, as we said here, the fish or the dolphins have a streamline shape. Why they have a streamline shape? We said a streamline shape, so I make a decreasing for the surface area. I made it smaller, so I decrease the surface area, so the water resistance decreases, and we must increase that the speed will increase. Take care in this question. Decrease surface area. So the water resistance decrease, and I start with the water resistance decrease, so after that the water resistance decrease, we're going to write that the speed increases. Chips are designed with a streamline shape, so it will be the same answer, to decrease the surface area, so the water resistance decreases and the speed increases. Okay, so again, in this lesson, we take the types of friction force, which are friction between two solids, a friction between a solid and air, and we called it air resistance. Friction between solid object and water, and we called water resistance. And we can say that both of them, the water resistance or the air resistance, are affected by two factors, which are the speed and the surface area. And by increasing the speed, both of them will increase, and by decreasing the speed, both of them will decrease. So there is a direct relationship between the speed and the air resistance or the water resistance. Then the surface area. By increasing the surface area, the air resistance or the water resistance increases, and by decreasing the surface area, air resistance and water resistance decreases. So there is a direct relationship between them. Okay, we finished our first lesson. I hope that you understand it. Thank you. Bye-bye.